I'm going to show you how to build this loan table here, which self-adjusts if you change any of the inputs. So this is a pretty useful table, but the problem comes when interest rates change. Most of these tables break when there's more than one interest rate. So we're going to show you how to build a table that automatically adapts with interest rate changes. So as you can see in this table here, I have multiple interest rates and this table adapts. The problem then we will encounter is that this doesn't automatically self-adjust. You'll need to adapt the formulas. So we'll move along to teach that as well. We'll create a solution where it adapts to interest rate changes and automatically self-adjusts as well for itself. So that'll be even more of a useful table and a real world one when you encounter changes. And finally, of course, we're going to add in lump sum situation where you can deposit and withdraw if you have something like an access bond. And like the previous one, this table will also self-adjust. If you'd like a single interest rate table, the link to this table download is in the description and the video tutorial where I explain how to do it. So you need these four pieces of information: the start date, the period of the loan, the interest rate, and the capital. And we derive these six columns. So in the tutorial, I explain how we use the functions: the sequence function, the EDATE function, the three PMT functions, namely PMT itself, IPMT for interest, PPMT for capital, and then the scan function to derive the totals. So please have a look at that. But let's dive into variable interest rates where we have the basic information for a loan. And on the left here, we have the starting date. We have the period of the loan, 12 months. The interest rates we begin at 5% and the capital amount of 75,000. Now, of course, we're going to add in a schedule where different interest rates apply. From 5 September till 4 December, we had 5%. From 4 December to 4 March, 10%. And then after 4 March, went down to 7%. So we're going to begin our table by numbering our periods. So our first period is numbered 0. That's easy. And we start out with our first closing balance being our 75,000. That's where we begin. So we're then going to number the periods with the function called the sequence function. So all we need to do is type in that we need 12 consecutive periods. That function is really easy. Then I'd like the date of my installments. So what we're going to use is a function called the end date function, or EDATE function, where we put down a starting period. That's the first argument of EDATE. The second one is how many months you'd like to add to. So all we need to do is feed in this period counter over here. And because we'd like from 0 to start off the very first installment, we use that as our inputs. What we're going to do is we're going to use the XLOOKUP function. And then the XLOOKUP takes which column you're going to be looking at first. So we look at column E, and then what return result we're going to give. So if you just put that in there now like that, you're going to get not applicable because there's nothing on 5 September. So we've got to use something called a non-exact lookup. The first column, of course, is if you find nothing, you could put 0, but I don't want 0. What we're going to go to is to the match mode. And the match mode, we are going to use a non-exact lookup, which is -1, an ascending non-exact lookup. So if I put in -1 there, now that will return a percentage for me. So, and if I pull this down, one will see that this returns the interest rate exactly according to the interval. This is for information that's sorted in an ascending way. And it will look up from 5 September to 4 November, 5%. Anything after 4 December, 10%. And after 4 March, return the 7% as we've done here. The PMT function to calculate the installment payable for each period. So we start with the first argument, which is the rate. We divide by 12 because we're calculating monthly. Then the remaining period is the next argument. So we, of course, begin with the total period of 12. And we then subtract what period number we're at, and that would be the remaining period. And we add +1 to balance the scales. Then the capital coming in, and we make that a minus, in this case 75. We make that a minus, or else your installment returns a negative figure. And that's your installment value. Then the interest value, we simply take the interest rate again divided by 12, and we multiply that by the opening capital, and that would be the interest for that period. So then simply taking the installment and subtracting the interest would give you the capital that you've repaid. So there's your installment split between two. Of course, our closing balance minus the capital would give us our final closing balance column. So if we copy this down, we will have ourselves a complete loan schedule amortized. Actually, that's simple. But of course, the problem now comes in where I go to extended period, for example, and you see that this table doesn't spill. I would have to go and fill down the missing detail, then no problem, it adds up. So our next step is going to be to convert this table into a self-adjusting dynamic table. So there's your installment split between two. Of course, our closing balance minus the capital would give us our final closing balance column. So if we copy this down, we will have ourselves a complete loan schedule amortized. Actually, that's simple. To make this a fully self-adjusting table, we need to enable some calculation settings, which you'll find under File, Options, and Formulas. And in here, you need to make sure that this box is ticked Iterative Calculation, making each column a dynamic self-adjusting range. And to do that, we go through each argument. The first two are fine. The EDATE, it spills the date section, as well as the sequence spills automatically and self-adjusts, as you saw when we extended our periods. But the rate one doesn't. So if we break the components down, what we could do is input the dates as a dynamic adjusting field. The problem comes in, as you can see, I get all sorts of errors. That's because there's cells in the way that doesn't allow that cell to spill. So great. So now the rate is self-adjusting like the previous two. So we're going to do a similar thing with the installment function. And we input our rate as we did with the rate column. And then the other field we can, of course, add a hashtag to and create a dynamic input is that. So the last one, of course, would be the capital. So what we would do would extend a range the same size as the others, being the closing balance. Then, of course, we get the similar result. Because there's cells in the way, we'll need to delete it, and our installment is worked out. So if we get to the interest rate one, we do the same thing. Let's put a dynamic interest rate in. And of course, we need to extend for our capital each time. And we input that same result. We delete the cells in the way, and our formulas update. And of course, the last one is going to be the capital balance, where we simply put our hashtags in place. And lastly, delete our cells in the way. And there we have all of those done. And we input our rate as we did with the rate column. Slightly trickier, so you may want to slow the description down here. The download and article link is in the description below to follow the details. So we're going to use this function called the scan function, which is essentially an accumulating running total function. It specializes in this. So the first argument will be where we start, and then what series of values we add next, called the array. That's very simply the capital amount. So we're going to subtract it off because we're running a decreasing balance. Then the operation you're going to fulfill, you could average or do whatever. We're going to sum simply. And there we go. That produces exactly the same result over here. But what we want to derive the very first value as well, the first 75,000. So what we want to do, we want to use another function to amend the input that we put in here. And we're going to use a function called the vstack function. And we're essentially just going to add 1 0. We put a 0 in the value. And when we adjust for that, we have the whole column derived. So this we can use as a substitute for the column to the left. So we substitute the formula. So let's delete everything first. And we simply take the formula and put it in place. There we go. Two of our calculations use the closing balance column, namely our interest. And you can see that as an input as well as the installment. So the problem is that at the moment we've got it as a fixed range. So if I were to expand this, of course, it won't grow because it will stop at row number 21. It won't grow with the table. So we've got to input this closing balance calculation into these two formulas. So the problem at the moment is that this uh, dynamic array is one row larger than the others. And if you put a larger series of values with a smaller series of values, that's going to give a problem. So we're going to deploy a function called the drop function to make this range of the closing balance one row smaller. So we put the range in, and then we take off one row. And there you go. You've now got the same size as the other components to the table. So we simply substitute this value for our fixed range. So we put this in here. There you go. And we do the same with the interest rate. Okay. Of course, deleting. So now we can comfortably expand. We've introduced some conditional formatting, which you can see in this table over here, which highlights every time there's an interest rate change. And it's a simple addition which is very useful. So if you go into conditional formatting, you can see the rules that I've installed in here. So it very simply says that if there's no preceding value of 0 and the current installment has a value, then if it's not the same as the previous, put a line in. This may be very useful in evaluating long loan schedules with multiple interest rates. So that's variable interest rates handled. To do in balloon payments, we'll need to add an extra column. So we're going to insert that and call it lump sums, and let's expand that. So if I put, say, a deposit of 5,000, make a withdrawal of 3,500, for example. So we'll need to refer to this column into our closing balance calculation. And the problem is it's not continuous. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a continuous range, the previous column, and use the offset function. So we're going to refer to the column before it and move it a column to the right. So the second argument it takes is rows. We don't want to shift any rows, and we're going to put one column to the right. So you can see that this refers perfectly on a continuous basis to a non-continuous range, as it were. So now what we need to do to feed this into the closing balance, we need to add 10, which we did with the capital amount into the calculation previously. So we're going to use again VStack or vertical stack. We're going to add a 0 and close that out. So there you have the range shifted 1. We're going to input this value into our calculation, and there we go. Now you'll see every time we make a deposit, our installments adaptable. It can handle capital deposits and withdrawals and multiple interest rate changes. In coming videos, we will show you how to scale this across 10 or even 100 loans if you like, and you do calculations across all of those sheets. So if you found this video helpful, please do like and subscribe to receive future notifications. And thanks very much for watching.